Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Please all take your seats so we can get started with our panel. I'm Sue Desmond-Hellman, the chair of the Galien U.S. Awards Committee, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to this esteemed panel. You're going to be delighted by who we have here with us this afternoon. First, let me just say that you can count me in as in the fan club of both Roy Vagelos and Ken Frazier. And so I understand everyone's wish to shake their hand and say hello. But here we have an unprecedented opportunity to convene in one panel leaders from 6 global companies responsible for mobilizing in record time safe, effective interventions to address the worst public health crisis in a century, so far responsible for 4.6 deaths worldwide. Now, I want to recognize each of these leaders joining us here today. Stéphane Bancel, Chief Executive Officer from Moderna. Albert Bourla, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Pfizer. Pam Cheng, Executive Vice President, Operations and Information Technology, AstraZeneca. Alex Gorsky, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Johnson & Johnson. Leonard Schiffler, President and Chief Executive Officer, Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. And Daniel Savransky, Senior Vice President and Chief Scientific and Medical Officer, Eli Lilly and Company. Now, I want you to recognize that these folks and all of their colleagues represent an incredible amount of innovation, bringing technologies forward. But as many of you just heard Ken Frazier say, these technologies behind these novel vaccines and therapeutics came as a result of decades, literally decades of bench research, often conducted in obscurity, and almost always with a heavy amount of skepticism behind it. Messenger RNA behind the COVID-19 vaccines was pursued by a dedicated few who persevered against that peer criticism and budgetary constraints to deliver biologic insights that now look obvious, but took years to coalesce into definable candidates for clinical testing. Likewise, the monoclonal antibody science that underpins new antiviral therapeutics extends back to discoveries of the novelist Cesar Milstein in the 70s and launched more than a decade after that with the first FDA-approved drug that was reliant on monoclonals in 1986, 35 years ago. All the history of striving in the lab confirms the durability and the potential of innovation from our ecosystem in biopharmaceuticals. That ecosystem is what we celebrate this week, the 50th anniversary of the Galien and its mission of innovation in service to humanity. I really like that, innovation in service to humanity. So I'm honored to co-moderate this panel with Dr. Petra Janser, who leads Accenture's European life sciences business, bringing innovative medicines and better health outcomes to patients. She draws on more than 20 years industry and R&D experience in the biopharmaceutical sector, both as an advisor and as a researcher, and has a PhD in immunology and an honors degree in molecular biology. During her career, she's been a role model for gender equity in the workplace and beyond. So now let me turn over to my co-chair, Petra Janser.
Thank you so much, Sue, and thank you for having me here with this very esteemed panel. It's an honor. It's been said a few times today that the COVID-19 pandemic has taken us beyond our tested limits and has challenged all of us professionally and also personally. The pandemic has proven to be an extraordinary catalyst and accelerant across many fronts. We've probably seen the biggest change in our personal behaviors, it's probably been the single biggest changer of our industry. And it has made possible what we felt wasn't possible for a long time, which is developing a set of safe and highly efficacious vaccines in less than a year, and bringing this innovation to patients out there in a time of extreme unmet medical need, while our healthcare systems were challenged to their limits. On the other hand, though, if we look at this success, it has also revealed, the pandemic has also revealed the flip side. It has shown us as an industry of how we can be better prepared for situations like this, probably be even more resilient as an industry. But it has also shown high inequality in terms of access to healthcare, and it has also shown imbalance in health equity. Now, this panel is all about learnings from the pandemic and what we can take out of this crisis, which the industry mastered so successfully, we should say. And so therefore, I would like to call on each of you to maybe share with us, each of you in 2 minutes, about what's been your number one key takeaway and learning after having been for almost 2 years sort of in this pandemic. And maybe Shannon, if I can ask you to get us started.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Petra, and thank you, Sue. Sue, you talked about this decades of bench research, and that's kind of where I'm going to start. One of the mottos we have at Moderna is pushing past the possible. And I think if you look at the last 2 years, without that kind of incredible dedication from the organization, from our scientists, and from our people, both in terms of the science and in terms of the ecosystem, we all wouldn't be here today in person for this amazing gala celebration. We've seen over the last 2 years the enormous potential of mRNA technology and mRNA vaccines. And I think we all appreciate in a way we never have before the importance of vaccines to public health and to human health. We're incredibly humbled as a company that our COVID-19 vaccine is playing a small part in eradicating COVID around the world. Our scientists have been laboring for more than a decade, often to skeptical responses about the promise of mRNA technology. And today, that small group of scientists is joined by over 2,300 Moderna employees who are continuing to lead the way, not just in COVID, but in the promise of mRNA technologies to further democratize healthcare. We've seen this year that there's a unique opportunity to develop vaccines against viruses impacting human health around the world. And I think there's been a call to action for that access, as you mentioned. We recently announced a phase 3 trial in CMV, leaning forward and going beyond where we are with COVID. And we think this platform technology for us and all others who are doing research has the potential to bring treatments to people who haven't had access to them before in a way that's faster, that's quicker, and that can improve outcomes. We believe that's a responsibility for all of us to do. When I flipped to the ecosystem, we also saw unprecedented cooperation, whether that's with regulators who found a way within a year to approve these vaccines. And we hadn't seen that time frame in the US or outside of the US at all. We've also seen, in the context of the ecosystem, unprecedented cooperation and collaboration among companies that were formerly competitors within a supply chain, because we saw mankind rally around the need to eradicate this pandemic and do everything we could together. I look forward to the rest of our panel, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. So there isn't a single learning, but it is actually across the scope. Maybe Daniel, from more an R&D medical perspective, what would you add?
Yeah, thank you, Petra. It's great to be here and represent 7,000 scientists and drug developers at Lilly. I've always known that they were smart and caring and hardworking. What I learned in the pandemic is how important it is to be bold. And 7 days, just 7 days after the first case in Indiana, in our home state, we had a drive-through testing facility, one of the first in the country, running for the public of our city and state in our corporate headquarters, coming around the circle where we drop off visitors. that was unimaginable years ago, that we would be directly providing medical care to people in our community for free with a diagnostic test. 7 months after that, we had the first emergency use authorization for a brand new antibody that we hadn't even thought about working on before that. 7 months. And within days after that, the first EUA for an immune modulatory drug for COVID-19. Like, those timelines, the idea that we could be that bold and get things done on that timeline is just an incredible thing to have learned firsthand. We can't unsee it. And the question is, how can we be that bold for other diseases, which are just as bad, that unlock our scientists and drug developers?
Thank you so much. So certainly boldness and speed is something that everybody would want the industry or wish the industry to take forward. Albert, can I ask you about what's your biggest takeaway and biggest learning?
Well, people, they don't know what they can and what they cannot do. And if anything, they severely underestimate their abilities to deliver. And I'm now more convinced than before that by asking people not to do better, but to do the seemingly impossible, will deliver things that you will be surprised, or at least will deliver better than what you thought. For example, let me give you an example. A drug cycle, a vaccine cycle is maybe 10 years. If you ask them to do it in 8 years, they will think it's very difficult, but still they will think within the box. They will try to improve the current processes and try to make them better so that they can deliver. If you ask them to do it in 8 months, which is what we did, immediately they realize that thinking within the box will take them nowhere. So they start thinking completely out of the box. Manufacturing. We in Pfizer produce 200 million doses of vaccines annually. That was in 2019, and 2020, our annual vaccine production across all vaccines, all our manufacturing sites. If you ask them, I want 300 now million doses of COVID, they will think, wow, it's very difficult. But they will think, again, how to improve the current process. We ask them 3 billion doses. They can't do it. They need to think completely out of the box. I am happy that I didn't stay with the current thinking, let's not disappoint them and ask something which is impossible, and I ask them to do something impossible, because they can do it.
Yeah, so you're adding to the notion of boldness and, going against the orthodoxies that we've always been there and ask people for the impossible. Pam, what's your perspective?
Thank you, Petra. I couldn't agree more. But I think the collective response to the pandemic from these companies really show what biopharma industry can do. And as a result of that, we brought multiple vaccines, antibodies to the market in record time. Right? And I think the last time I checked, we are over 6 billion doses of vaccine administered worldwide because of the company on stage. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. In AstraZeneca, we started the journey in April, May of 2020. And to Albert's point, we think of vaccine in millions of doses, often not billions of doses. We commercialized our COVID-19 vaccine in 8 months. We have supplied 1.7 billion doses of our vaccine thus far. I mean, absolutely amazing. And that leads to the lesson, not so much about the lessons, the highlights of what we've experienced during the pandemic. 2 things. Number 1, people. It is absolutely astonishing, the extraordinary discretional effort by so many people when you are united behind a common mission. Hundreds of people within AstraZeneca and hundreds more across our supplier network. And many of them, including my boss, Pascal Soriot, the CEO of AstraZeneca, and myself, we put our lives on hold so that we can do this. And it's just incredible what we experienced. The second point is around technology, particularly digital technology. Now, this happened, obviously, during COVID. There was no travel. We couldn't dispatch our technical staff. We set up our supply chain in 15 countries at over 25 sites to be able to deliver billions of doses. So what we did was utilize, for example, augmented reality technology. And our technical staff, our experts, guided 25 CMOs at every corner of the world through this complex vaccine manufacturing. Quite a task. So it's absolutely amazing what we've gone through.
Amazing. And I like how you're adding to the boldness and going for the unprecedented, the mission and the purpose that actually gets people going and keeps people reaching for the impossible, alongside the augmentation with the technology. Fantastic ingredients that we're hearing from our panelists here. Alex, can I ask you
Sure.
to add to the soup?
Am I on?
You are.
Len, we should have been at the other end of the line because it's always difficult to be at this end of the chairs. But first of all, just let me say how proud I am to be sharing the stage with the leaders, my colleagues, my friends, the companies that they represent. It's probably been a few times in history where the biopharmaceutical industry has made such a difference for humankind, and to be up here with them. And having this discussion is just awesome. So thank you for Galien for providing this forum. I also just want to recognize Roy, leaders like Roy, Sam, Ken. While all of us have got the privilege of being in the roles that we are now at this moment, none of this would have happened were it not for us being on your shoulders. And decades of research, of effort, of failure to get us to where we are. And I guess my 2 points really build on that. I think the first one is the arc of science is long. And in our case, when Paul Stoffels first had the vision about how do we imagine maybe a world without disease, and people would look at him and say, "What are you talking about? That's not possible." And he said, well, if we're going to do that, then we need to not only be in therapeutics, but we also need to think about vaccines. How do we prevent disease from happening in the first place? And more than 12 years ago, we made our first foray into vaccines, acquiring a company where the very first platforms didn't work. Like many of us in this, we went through the quadrant analysis about where it was going to be. We followed a write-down. And were it not for the passion and the belief of the importance of the fundamental science behind it, we would never have been in the position where we are today. And I think we all need to, in the crisis du jour, the pressure of the day that we all face, just remember that this long-term point of view is more important than ever, especially in this field. And I think, Pam, second building and maybe on yours is that sense of urgency that we all observed and that we felt, and without which none of this would have been possible. And I just had a chance to be in Belgium about a week ago with some of our scientists and engineers who were involved. And in addition to the work that they were doing, as I'm sure we've all observed, it reminded me that these were moms and dads. These were brothers and sisters who had parents at home, were trying to figure out how to homeschool the children, and somehow found the strength, somehow found the support to make all this happen. And we should never lose the importance of that secret sauce, of the passion of our people to make all that possible in such a record time to make a difference for the world.
Thank you so much, Alex. And please, Len, I'm sorry that you're at the very back end of the panel, but
It's
please.
not a problem at all. First of all, it's great to hear the lessons learned from the amazing success stories. But I've been doing this a very long time, and I've had a lot of failures. So I thought maybe I would focus on what are the lessons we've learned from the failures. And it really starts, in my opinion, with the fact that politics and science don't mix so well. Politicians have a currency, which is if somebody says $1 trillion and another person says $3 trillion, somewhere between 1.75 and 2.25, in theory, they reach a compromise. Scientists get together, and if this half of the room says the world is flat, and this half says it's round, they don't put out a press release and say it's oval. Okay? It's just not the way it's done. Science is seeking truth, and politics is seeking compromise. And that has resulted in some dramatic failures. And what are the two biggest failures? We have people who have delivered vaccines where everybody in this country could be vaccinated. It's just not happening. That's a humongous failure that we're all still suffering from. And people are still dying from. Yes, we're happy we can get together, but people are still dying. And they're still going into hospitals. And yet we have the weapon of vaccines, and you have to ask, why is that? In part, think about this. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been called as an industry everything from money grubbing, that's the nicest thing they've said about us, to murderers, okay? Would you take a product from people who were thieving murderers? I mean, you might understand why people have a hesitancy about what the great work that people have done to bring forth a vaccine. And the politicalization of the discussion, where it's red and blue, who gets vaccinated and who doesn't, that's terrible. So that's one failure. The second failure is, thanks to Lilly, thanks to the people at Regeneron, thanks to others, we have these monoclonal antibodies. They are literally a cure, or as close to a cure as you're ever going to get in a pandemic setting. They keep people out of hospitals or stop them from dying, and they're amazing. We produce millions of doses amongst us. The government bought them, and they wanted to give them back to us. They wanted us to buy it back. So what was going on? Why weren't people taking this? It's a huge failure. People died because before the vaccines were widely available, the monoclonals were out there, and we didn't get people to take them. I think that lays at the foot of the scientific/political interface, the maniacal focus on vaccines and the fear of telling people that there was a treatment which might make people not take a vaccine. Somehow that all didn't come out in the wash very well. So I think we've had big failures, and we have to learn. And the last failure, I think, is we need to be better prepared. It probably won't happen because our system isn't set up to think long term. So I applaud all the successes, but I think we do have to learn from some of the failures.
Absolutely agree, and thank you very much. It was very insightful collection of your views, and I like the notion, we can celebrate, but we should look forward and see, what do we still need to do better. As we are, and thank you for these first statements, we'll now focus the next section of the panel on diagnostics and therapeutics, and then Sue will sort of moderate us, going a little bit deeper into the vaccines and sort of what are the learnings from the vaccines. Now, in the pre-pandemic phase, and Len, you've just started to actually go there. In the pre-pandemic phase, in the early pandemic phase, when the vaccines were still under development, rapid diagnostic treatments were of utmost importance. And I would like to maybe invite Daniel and Len to sort of share some of the learnings, and you started sort of on, we can do better. We had something, but we weren't able to actually get it to people. But what enabled you actually to be that rapidly ready with your diagnostics and antibodies? And what are some of the learnings actually, building maybe on what you just said, Len? So how can we build on the learnings from this pandemic and, improve further?
Sure. Would you like me to start?
Sure.
Yeah, so for us, I think, and I'm going to guess the same is true for Regeneron, it's about the platforms that enabled us to go fast. So we had been investing in certain platforms for discovery and development of monoclonal antibodies that we could then leverage. And every step of the way, we said, you could do it this way on the platform, or you could make it slightly better, but it would be off the platform. Pick the platform. Stick with what you know that's going to work and go fast. So it's those decades of investment that prepared us to go quickly. Same thing on the diagnostics. We developed diagnostics for cancer, and now developing a diagnostic in our CLIA lab. I think, in terms of the learning, though, I totally agree with what Len has said, that the science and the technology were there. We challenged our people to do impossible things. They delivered. And then the failure was like medical systems and politicians and not adopting the care that we had delivered so quickly. In fairness, probably the adoption of monoclonal antibodies is one of the fastest adoptions of any new therapeutic modality for any disease. I mean, it's really gone from 0 to millions of doses in a year, but on the other hand, it was way too slow. And certainly hundreds of thousands of people could have benefited in those early months, and there was no uptake. And so the thing I learned there is, like, don't underestimate how hard it is to change medical care, and everyone's got to be speaking in one voice, politicians, CDC, NIH, FDA, and that just did not happen.
Yeah, so let me switch back to the deep science lessons that we learned. We had been building, George Yancopoulos, our head of R&D, has been building our monoclonal antibody platform for decades, and have been thinking about how we deal with potential pandemics. And we first got involved in the Ebola outbreak in Africa. And what we learned there was that these things can happen fast, but monoclonals can be gotten fast. And so, but the real key for us was never underestimate these bugs. These bugs have been around for a long time, and there's billions of them. And it only takes one of them to get a little better. And we've seen how fast Delta went from 3% to 99.6% in a matter of almost weeks, I think, but it was maybe several months. So we learned not to underestimate the bugs from the Ebola. We had a triple antibody cocktail. We believed that one had to have multiple attacks if you were going to be an antiviral, because these viruses mutate. And that was our approach, and we had a platform that was able to deliver on that. And I think that that's something we keep in mind. We're not done yet with variants that might emerge. These bugs are out there, and we have to keep working and staying ahead of it.
Thank you very much. As we now dive into the deeper discussion on the vaccines, can I invite Sue back? You're not audible.
Sue, I think you're muted.
Unmute.
We can't hear you.
You are muted.
Muted, Sue.
And unlike the NFL where they cover what they're saying, we still can't. we still can't say what you're saying.
There we go.
Yeah,
There we go.
There we go.
Can you hear me now? Okay,
Yep.
sorry. I actually didn't mute myself. I have lots of Zoom practice this year. So sorry about that. Let's go to a few questions about vaccines. Albert, you described, I think, breathtaking changes in the pace of vaccine development and in manufacturing. Now you've shown you can do it, setting the bar in a different place. How do you think about future therapies, particularly vaccines, but beyond COVID? How do your learnings and your organization's learnings influence how you think about the future and that pace and your perspective on it?
Thank you, Sue. It's very clear that people demand, if you were able to do it for COVID, why not for cancer? Is it less of a problem? We should be able to implement those learnings and dramatically improve the way that our research productivity, in terms of timing and effectiveness, is addressing unmet medical needs. Now, to do that, there is, of course, a need to do things internally within a company, but also there is a need to have broader collaborations, and particularly public-private collaborations, because without that wouldn't be possible. Let me start with that one. FDA may take 3 months to answer a question that is blocking the movement from one phase of the trial to the other. You have a request to alter a protocol, they may take 2 months to review it. During the COVID period, they did it in 2 days or 3 days. They were equally responsible, and they should get a lot of credit for the successes we had. But that comes also with a responsibility. Are they going to go back to the 3 months period? Is it a question of resources? Because if it is a question of resources, again, we need to discuss it, how we can provide them the additional resources. Because now we have seen what restricting the bureaucracy and making it let's say, way more agile the way that regulators guide us in our work, it's crucial, it's very important. So that's one. Now let me go into the internal. The reasons I think why we were successful was because, one, culturally we made a mental shift that nothing is impossible, which I discussed before. But also there was a recognition that we will not let internal bureaucracy, because also big companies, they have also their own bureaucracies, to stay in the way. And we forced, let's say, a very different way of working. We didn't respect the hierarchy. There were not layers of management. In a meeting, you can have 4 layers of management, rather than having 4 meetings that each layer filters what the next layer will see. And those were very important things. Now, both of them, I think, are there to stay with us. Once we have 6 business units, 5 of them were watching one, which is the vaccines business unit, becoming the heroes of the world, doing miracles. How do you think they feel? They want also their own moments of COVID. They want to have their cancer moment of COVID. We call this project Lightspeed at Pfizer, right? So now everybody has a Lightspeed project. Now, we were careful because you can't do that everything, but they select the one that could have great impact and that you can, if you focus, you can do greater things than what is the normal plan. And they are focusing on doing that. That's very important. Because the culture, you have 80,000 people that believed that, yes, things can be done. So that's very important. Bureaucracy is way more challenging to break, because it was way easier internally, to justify breaking the standard processes when there was a pandemic, world health crisis, and there is a tendency for the organization to go back. And this is where I think me, us, all of us, we need to be committed that we will break it and we will not let it stand in the way. So just a few thoughts.
Hey, Albert,
No, that's great.
or Sue, if I could just maybe build
Yes,
on one
please.
point that
Please,
Albert
please,
said.
Alex.
Which you said we could make it a bit of a free-for-all.
Please.
So we'll do that.
Go for it.
I don't know how you would agree with this, but from conversations, I think you will. There were times last summer when I probably felt more like a product manager on the vaccine than I did the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, or project manager. Given the spotlight, given the amount of detail, how rapid things were moving, and I think it really demanded a lot more in terms of dexterity on the part of leaders, because not only were we functioning in a virtual world, but like you said, you needed to make decisions in a very compacted time frame. You were trying to cut through many layers of bureaucracy within our companies, and you were getting a call from either the White House or the EU or another governmental agency on a similar timeline. And somehow, if we can marshal that going forward, I'm not sure that is sustainable over the long term on every project, but it was a really special time that I think without that kind of operational level and environment, we never would have been able to accomplish what we have.
I have to argue against what Albert and Alex just said. I'm sorry.
What's new, Len?
Maybe it's my nature, New York nature. I don't know.
Why am I not surprised?
But I have to say that we need to distinguish between the Herculean engineering scale-up feats that were all necessary for us to deliver at scale products versus the exceptionalism that one woman scientist or man working in a lab has an insight about how to do something differently. That is not a bureaucracy problem. That is not a scaling problem. That is not an engineering problem. That is creating a pipeline of scientists investing in science and scientists, and exceptionalism that scientists who have a spark. What you described, Albert, is an engineering problem, a bureaucracy problem. But you can't cure cancer that way. That's still going to come from an individual who has a spark, an idea, and tries something a little differently, not how to make 3 billion doses when we only make 200 million. We got to get 1 dose right now for a cancer problem or a degenerative neurologic disease problem. So we shouldn't mislead the audience to think that we've got it all figured out now. We know how to get rid of bureaucracies. We have 4 layers of management in one. That's all great for speed, but it doesn't get you that unique idea we need to go forward.
See, Len, I would argue that it's an and, not an or.
I
that
agree
you
with
need
that.
the great light bulb over the head, but once the light bulb's over the head, if you can't execute, especially in a pandemic in an efficient manner, I think you're saying the same thing, but it is both, I think. Let's hear from Shannon about Moderna. How did you experience this kind of sense of need for pace at a much smaller new company, relatively new company like Moderna? Shannon?
So I'd be remiss if I didn't point out we've been around for 10 years. You just may not have heard of us until the last 2. So just clarify that.
Thank you for that.
I'm a little envious of the bureaucracy because when you have a company of 2,300 people who did not have a commercial launch ever until December of last year, who literally was building the factory line by line as it was producing commercial product, I could use a little bureaucracy. So if we can figure out a little bit how to horse trade there. I think what's interesting when you think about Moderna, and it builds a little bit, Dan, on what you said, the platform technologies have a lot to offer the future of healthcare and innovation. Because when you prove a replicable platform, in our case, messenger RNA, which we believe is not limited to COVID, is not limited to vaccines. We have programs in autoimmune, in immuno-oncology, in cardiovascular. It's a new way of thinking about drug development and drug discovery. The platform itself demonstrates safety. And so what if we could reimagine how we thought about interactions with regulators by rethinking how much time do you need to do both safety and efficacy? Can we take the lessons, and Albert, I love what you said, that we learned this year from FDA. In 2 days, the virus was sequenced in a combination of NIH and Moderna from when the Chinese scientists released it. In 41 days after that, it was in the hands of NIAID for phase 1 trials. That speed that we've heard from each of these innovations is unprecedented. What do we need to believe to make that happen? In a company that's a small company, the biggest challenge is being able to put enough bodies behind all of the things that need to happen for our drugs to get approved, for our drugs to get to market, and for the supply chain not to have a single misstep to make sure that we're continually able to supply the vaccines that the world needs. But for us, we come back and say we've had, humbly, a part in what's happening in eradicating COVID around the world. That is a success, but how do we hold on to what makes our company the most valuable to us, which is that unrelenting focus on new innovations, not being afraid to fail just because now you've had a success and the spotlight might be higher and you're afraid, what if people on the outside aren't going to believe what we're doing from an innovative perspective? We have to keep that magic sauce, grow smartly, leverage data, science, and artificial intelligence wherever we can so as not to get too big. But most important for us is how do we influence the external regulatory ecosystem to allow us to get speed to market and impact the lives of patients more quickly.
Hey, Sue,
Well, that's very inspiring. I want to make sure that we talk about a really critical thing on the vaccine front and ask Pam, at AstraZeneca, you were part of the international discussions on vaccines. How do you think about low and middle income countries and vaccine equity?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sue. Thank you. And before I answer that, if I can just kind of add on to what my co-panelists here said in terms of what we've gone through during the pandemic. I think we need to remember, you are looking at the companies that were successful in doing what we were trying to do to combat the pandemic. There were many other companies. Merck, for example, had put tremendous amount of effort into trying to make a difference, right? And I think it took a village of people during the pandemic to do what we've done. And I don't think we should sit here and say, we can copy that every time. We won't be able to. I mean, that took a lot of people, a lot of effort, from scientists to engineers to everyone else. I think what we need to really think about is these challenges we've had over the past 18 months should really drive at different ways of working. And I think many of us are seeing that happening within our company. So the question should be, where is that sweet spot? How do we learn that new ways of working, coupled with that convergence of science and technology, and trying to bring the next wave of innovation to market to the patients faster? Now, coming back to Sue, to your question, I mean, broad and equitable access was really at the heart of what AstraZeneca was trying to do at the very beginning. We said to ourselves, this has to be a vaccine for the world. And a vaccine for the world has to have global supply network, right? We've made 1.7 billion doses of our vaccine at no profit. 2/3 of that 1.7 billion doses have gone to low and low middle income countries. We are extremely proud of that. Supplying vaccine through the COVAX facility is one of the key distribution strategies we have, and almost 50% of all the vaccines supplied through COVAX facility is from AstraZeneca. We understand none of us are safe until all of us are safe. So we are doing everything we can to make sure that we continuously evaluate other ways, opportunities to ensure a broader, fairer, and faster supply for the world. And I think that's part of our responsibility. And not only on the vaccine, we actually have an antibody, long-acting antibody, AZD7442, that is potentially for treatment as well as prevention. So we want to be the company, along with many on the stage here and many others who are trying to truly make a difference in this unprecedented sort of threat to humanity.
It's great. Alex, did you want to weigh in on this? I know you and Paul have been really active, Paul Stoffels, on health equity, not just for COVID, but really in a big way globally.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Similar to what Pam was just saying, we tried to consider that from the very beginning in a couple of ways. Certainly there was the global component of what could you do to ensure that you had a vaccine that could be used globally in the very best possible way, where a lot of issues wouldn't be barriers, recognizing that this was a global pandemic. We thought about it when we did not only at the design of the platform itself, but in the way that we conducted clinical trials, trying to ensure that we had broad representation, demonstrating utility across a number of different countries, and that carried through all the way into the part that probably isn't as well appreciated was the work that was going behind the scenes with all the companies regarding the actual distribution. Yeah. Because while the science was remarkable, and maybe an additional inside baseball, we knew early on that, Len, to your point, if we didn't have trust with people about the data, that we were going to have a really difficult time. Hence, when we decided collectively to put together a statement, a letter that went out, talking about our commitment to making sure that we were following the science to help build that trust, we knew that last mile was going to be really difficult. And while the science, or the chemistry and the biology and the engineering was tough, getting shots in arms was going to be a major challenge. So trying to work, again, with governments around the world to help build that infrastructure was going to be very, very important. But I think, look, I think the other thing that this exposed right here in the United States was, unfortunately, the gap that we have in healthcare, in access, in outcomes, and what people face daily in a country where arguably when you're ill you can have the very best healthcare systems, but if people can't get access to it, and what we see in our society, unfortunately, is manifested in our healthcare system. So when you consider issues of racism, for generations, unfortunately, people haven't had access early on. When you look at the morbidity and mortality associated with COVID-19, and you just split it across races, it's completely unacceptable. And I think it's more incumbent upon us as an industry to really look hard. We won't be able to do it alone. It's going to take a lot of partnerships with healthcare systems and others. But what can we be doing when we look at our science? What can we be doing better when it comes to the way we do our clinical trials? What can we be doing better when it comes to the way we partner with healthcare systems regarding, pricing, access, and ultimately administration to try to reduce that gap? And so I think, for one, I think this is a special moment. We shouldn't waste this crisis to see what can we do to make some pretty dramatic improvements based upon the need that we all see.
Thank you to all of you. That was really terrific. And it's, I think that highlights both the thrill of being on the front lines, which all of you have in very positive ways, but the challenges. It's daunting to be out there. Let me turn back over to Petra to talk about some of the management lessons learned.
Thank you very much, Sue. And I think Pam and also you, Alex, to some extent started to talk about one of the next questions that I would wanted to discuss with you. So the vaccine was developed in record time, but it needed to be deployed. And so Alex, Albert, if I can ask you, being amongst the first ones to move, what were actually some of the challenges with deployment? What have you done to overcome them? But also, what can be sort of taken forward now as we think about, going to markets faster and sort of really deploying these medications rapidly?
With deployment, let's start that our vaccine needed to be stored at -70 degrees.
Yeah.
When they told me that, when we could choose other technologies, because Pfizer, we had adenovirus, we had protein technologies, we had conjugate technologies, and we had 2 years of experience, basically, with BioNTech in mRNA technology. And when they suggested to me, let's go with mRNA, one of the things that I told them, you must be kidding me, is because it's going to be the first product ever, not the COVID vaccine. But they convinced me, and we took the risk, and we went with that. The last thing that they told me before they make sure that I sign is, by the way, we need to store it in -70 degrees. And I was desperate because I already had told them, let's go. But then I said, so let's find a solution to do it with -70. And this is when they came again with this, I would say, genius idea that they built dry ice facilities. So because we wanted tremendous quantities of dry ice. And then they designed this box, our engineers, with the GPS. And so suddenly we start shipping billions of doses. And we knew, right now we know at every single point of time where the box is, every single box of that, because there is a GPS, what is the temperature inside. And actually there is also, if someone opens the box, there is a lie detector so that send a signal that the external container has been breached. So all of that, I think, was a big challenge that we had to overcome. But, there were so many technical challenges to be able to do that. But I would say for me, the biggest challenge during that period was the political challenge. Mm-hmm. There is nothing to compare to that, right? It was a crazy period of elections. People were really polarized. And frankly, both sides were trying to bully us. One was saying, you need to do faster. We need it before the elections. And the other was saying, slow down. We need it after the elections. And this is where we I sent a letter to employees, but I put it into our web also, that I said, some are telling us to go faster, some to go slower. I'm telling you that we will go with the speed of science. That, for me, was a new experience to try to navigate. And there was a new CEO as well, very polarized. It was like a minefield. Wherever you were going, you could face significant issues. So that was, for me, one of the biggest challenges. And the other one, which I never expected to be, was we decided not to take the government money. So we thought that would be perceived nice from the government. Mm-hmm. So you do it without taking our money. Not really. Because they felt, and it's not only the government, but it's also the middleman, the whole mechanism, the whole thing of exception FDA, which they wouldn't care. But everybody else, they felt that they resonate less with that, the operation of warp speed, than with if we were taking the money. Although we were telling them, we are part of you, just to do it with our own dime. That was a big challenge. We saw significant challenges to us because we were not part of the team. So politically, that was what I never expected to be, and it was even more than the technical challenge.
Thank you. And Pam, I see a lot of nodding on your end. Do you want to add to that, please?
I think we've all established here today, global pandemic, politics, media don't really mix very well. And I would think we learned it throughout the past 18 months. I think, we run the risk of sitting here making this sound a bit easy, right? truth of the matter is we were racing with time. And Alex said you were probably the most expensive product manager.
Probably.
I was probably the most expensive data analyst. Yeah. I mean, there were times, Pascal and I literally looking at spreadsheets because every day count. Now, we were fortunate. Our vaccine can be stored at normal cold chain at -25, for example. So in the end of the day, it was really about racing with time. How do we get every single dose? Literally, I'm not joking. We were babysitting every batch from around the world. How many doses goes where, and how fast we can get it there. At a time where there was border control, there was logistic issues, and so on and so forth. But the other thing we also realized is that it really needs intense collaboration between public health, private companies, as well as this whole vaccine ecosystem to save lives. None of us can tackle this alone. And we never felt as interdependent as on with governments around the world, agencies around the world, organizations, to kind of get this right. And I think it will be absolutely a crisis wasted if we don't take all these lessons learned and apply to how we bring innovation, life-saving drugs to the patients in the future.
Absolutely. If I can just build on one aspect, because I agree with everything that's been said, but let's not forget the people who made this happen, because they're not those of us who are sitting here. There are the employees at each of our respective companies who worked 24/7, nights, weekends, some of whom still haven't had a vacation because we're still trying to meet the demand globally around the world, who themselves and whose families were affected by COVID and the pandemic, who came in every day because they believe in the mission of making the lives of patients better. And I think we all sit here today on the backs of those people who had the courage to show up for us and make sure that we got our innovation where it needed to be. Yeah.
Thank you for that absolutely great statement. And we hope that, looking at politics and looking at some of the policymakers, that is being heard and considered, and comparable behaviors being sort of displayed there. I want to just quickly switch gears and Alex, maybe ask you, in this pandemic, has the commercial landscape around vaccines actually changed? And maybe more specifically, does that influence the way you look at your R&D pipeline and the outlook sort of with that type of modalities?
Sure, but Petra, before I answer, I just
Sure.
one other comment that maybe to build on some of the early conversation, and that is the populism and the nationalism that I think we also all experienced as companies as we were trying to navigate our way through this, is something that we fundamentally have to find a way to address going forward, because all of us are global companies. When I say global companies, that doesn't just mean we sell around the world. That means we have employees in different pockets around the world who are looking to us to make decisions that are in the best interest of the globe. And the challenges that we faced frequently in terms of data transfer, tech transfer, and frankly being able to get drug substance across borders versus drug product in another area, especially in a global pandemic where all of us have got pretty integrated networks that we're relying on. That's the only way you can achieve what we can with the speed and the science were immense. And I think as we think about lessons learned and what can we do to that next is making sure that we don't allow, and this is a big ask, those political forces to overcome what ultimately can really make a difference for the world by bringing these kind of global constructs to bear. But going forward, the vaccines, I think this has absolutely changed. Whether it's the science, whether it's the need, hopefully it's changed the way we think about global public health. Yeah. For all too long, it's been the 14th highest priority on everyone's top 10 list. Nobody wants to invest in global public health. It was that's that other conference room over there. And and we learned that while there's a lot of things we take on, all it takes is one of these pandemics, and we're on the edge in terms of economic stability, national security, societal security, and shame on us if we don't make some of that investment, make some of that preparation And it doesn't all need to be redundant. There's a lot of things that we can do within our companies where by expanding here and there, sharing capacity in certain areas, it can be done in a smart way. But I think it's a real call for us to address that because I think as Len made it earlier, there's a high probability, unfortunately, we'll face another one of these in our lifetime. Because one of these bugs it's smarter than even the people in this room. And making sure that we are better prepared and have learned those lessons is going to be more important than ever on a global basis.
Thank you. Len, do you agree this time?
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you.
That was too easy.
Len,
an
what's going
answer.
on with you?
Holy smokes.
You are getting
That's
you're getting
right.
soft.
I got to look for my chairman over there.
Okay, he agrees this time. On a more serious note, would you want to add to Alex's perspective?
No, I really do agree. I mean, I think that if we don't have a global perspective, we're going to have a really big problem. But I just think that there are mistakes that these global initiatives have. I think maybe Albert pointed it out when, well, why don't you license 20 people to make your stuff? Well, you know, when we have supply chain problems and you don't have enough media and it's going to 20 people who don't know what they're doing, that's not necessarily a solution. And frankly, incentives do matter. You know, Albert, you talked about that there were some people who wanted you to hurry up and other people wanted you to go slower. Imagine how we felt when we were treating Trump. Okay, I'll just quit on that.
I just say, a good note to stop here, I would say. We are running a little bit out of time, but Daniel, I did want to ask you, you know, is there, you know, with the pandemic, a view or a different vision of how we do science and medical science in the future, above and beyond vaccines?
Yeah, above and beyond infectious disease even. I think, you know, as I said before, there are things that we've seen here that we can't unsee. So we talked a lot about speed and boldness and challenging people to do impossible things. Yes, let's keep that. We talked about collaboration. Our effort, you know, started with a Canadian biotech company, Upsellera, a Chinese pharmaceutical company, Junshi, scientists at NIH working nights and weekends in collaboration with us. We worked with Amgen on manufacturing. We would call Regeneron and share data. You know, that kind of collaboration across the industry. Let's not lose that. How can we bring that to other diseases? And the third we talked about here as well, but I just call it out again. The inequity in healthcare that led to a disproportionate burden of COVID on minority group members. It was really painful to see. We doubled our efforts then on clinical trials, which taught us to go to where the patients are, to go to nursing homes, to set up testing facilities in church parking lots. You know, this idea of decentralized clinical trials, of meeting patients where they are. That's I think here to stay. We're doing that already in Alzheimer's. So I think we can't unsee the diversity problem and the need to improve on that by meeting patients where they are. Those are the three things that I think fundamentally will change how we conduct R&D at Lilly from this point on.
Yeah. Thank you. And we heard quite a bit about that in our first panel this morning. Shannon, anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, it's hard to top that because I would have said exactly the same three things. So I think those are important. Maybe just double clicking down on the why. Why is that where we are, right? It comes from a legacy in our industry of cutthroat competition, of believing that if it's not invented here, it's not nearly as good, of dual or triple tracking the same treatments for the same conditions because there was a business opportunity as opposed to a public health lens. How do we take a step back now and critically examine ourselves as well, the why we got where we were 18 months ago? And how do we move forward now together collaboratively as an industry who has a responsibility for human health, full stop. And I think if we can do that, this pandemic will prove to be a sea change for humanity. And we need to seize that opportunity and hold ourselves responsible.
Thank you so much. I want to give a few minutes to the audience. I'm sure there's a lot of burning questions to our fantastic panel here. If people can maybe stand up and come forward with their questions. And we have a microphone here. Don't be shy. Please.
So hi, my name is Ken Bach. The question is this: you've talked about capturing the learning experiences. I wonder how granular you're getting. Are you having people within your organizations document this in some way that you'll share? How does it come together? Is it individual by company? Is it collective by this type of group? What are the mechanisms for the future? We did have a national pandemic strategy, which it's somewhere in probably the universe. But how do we capture this so we have this again in the if we have an issue like this again in the future, we'll remember?
I think a very big part is culture, and that I think was a catalyst to be able to change, let's say, the culture of the people. That's one. But also there is a very big part which is procedural, how you are going about it and how you are merging layers and how you accelerate things. And in our case, what we did is that we asked every business unit to present their own light speed project, that we were going to apply the exact same principles, the exact same way that we operated during COVID with the vaccines business unit in the oncology or in the rare disease or in the internal events, and they do it. So, and then we started. So, of course, someone has said that you can't do that. I think you said that you can't do that constantly with everything. And also, when you don't have the urgency of a pandemic that is affecting the lives of all, you will see less level of sacrifice, because otherwise it will be suicidal, not sacrifice. But the fact that we have it in every single business unit and they are replicating the same way of how we did COVID, I think will give us significant lessons. And then we can refine. So that's the way we try to approach it.
If I can
Same
just,
thing.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Just quickly, if I can just add to what Alper said. Above and beyond what happens within a company to learn, I think the industry has a role to come together. So I'll give you one example. So there's an industry group of my equivalents. I'm head of manufacturing, for example, and supply chain. There's a group of myself equivalent comes together, and we've talked on the agenda, 5 hours meeting, we talk about what are we doing, whether or not you're in the COVID-19 vaccine or antibody business, how are we helping ourselves to go faster? How do we develop and manufacture medicines and vaccines faster so that, again, driven by the fact that in the end of the day, you're delivering life-changing medicines and vaccines to the patient quicker, right? So I think the industry has a role to play to come together to do this sharing as well.
And look, I also hope that we can do that in some way, and I know this is maybe an impossible ask given the media-dominated environment that we're in, but how do we also do that with governments? Because if we don't do that in a manner with regulators and other administrative officials, we will miss out on a big opportunity, given some of the challenges and gaps that we faced along the way.
By the way, do you feel the FDA has taken the same approach to the learning experience based on what you're hearing from your regulatory personnel? I'm sorry, they don't want to answer that question publicly, I suppose.
No, look, I think it's hard to say because they're still experiencing it. We're still going through it. But I would pick up on what Albert said. Look, by and large, found them to be in a partnering mode much more significantly than we've ever experienced. But I think all of us have got lessons that we've learned through this so that we're much better prepared and positioned for the next round.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have another question there,
Yes,
please.
hi, Brian Harvey, retired FDA.
Okay, just for the record, that was not scripted.
But luckily, a while ago and recovered through my time at Pfizer. One of the things I want to point out, we're hearing about the regulators, and yes, FDA did step up in many cases. Unfortunately, it's like the balloon when you squeeze it. If you're in some of those therapeutic areas like functional GI, things just sat and nothing happened. But what I want to alert folks to is that starting, of course, in 1992, we had PDUFA, the user fees, and there was massive hiring, and I was actually hired under what we call PDUFA, which is now seen as PDUFA 1. But here we are now 25 years later, and there's going to be a wave of retirement. And of course, one of the things I've found is that it's individuals who have had the experience, who have spent time, seen a lot of things, who are the ones that are able to react to the new situations and use what they've learned. And the younger the reviewers, or the younger the individuals and the less experienced, the more conservative they are and the more likely they are to adhere to sort of the rigid guidelines. So we actually need to prepare for this wave of retirement. And unfortunately, Congress has stepped back, and the number of appropriated dollars have gone down as the number of PDUFA user fee dollars have gone up. And so we need to make sure that we not only have the money, but we have the encouragement. We need to be recruiting the best and the brightest from the universities, from the academic programs, who have the knowledge to be able to react to these new technologies on a timely manner. Otherwise, all of the efforts of the folks on this distinguished panel are going to have traction problems in the regulatory space. So, but thank you for your comments today.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Do we have any more questions? We have this like blinking red light telling us we are late, but of course, if there's another burning question here, please.
Yes, so hi, Elaine Brennan with Northwell Health, a large integrated health system. So I want to commend you all for your time to solving this crisis. My question is, what, if anything, with learnings, with the integration of the drug to healthcare and speed to getting it out to the patient? Is there something that we need to be talking about together with respect to you guys and us on the healthcare provider side?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, medical practice changes slowly, and it's painful. I think doctors and even guideline writers sometimes think that their job is like to test whether a drug had 2 clinical trials that each had a p-value less than 0.05 and then look for holes. That's easy. The hard part is to use judgment when there's uncertainty in the face of dying patients. And for some reason, medical systems, guideline writers, doctors have been trained not to do that anymore, and we probably have to reverse that.
Yeah, on that question, I really think we have to figure out how to transport around the country best practices. When we looked at how monoclonals were distributed, what they did in Utah was quite remarkable, how they mobilized the state. And some people might not like it, but what they did in Florida was truly remarkable. Remember, we went from a collective demand of a few thousand per week to a peak demand to close to 300,000 per week. And a lot of that was going to Florida and Texas. And you can put motivations or politics aside, and you can criticize for not doing some of the other things that needed to be done. But what got done in Texas and Florida showed it can be done. You can get a monoclonal antibody. The Mass General told us they couldn't do it. They didn't have the people. They couldn't get the sick people with the well people. But in Florida, they were doing it in the public libraries, and they were doing 50,000 a week. So we have to spread those learnings when it works somewheres. We need to figure out, and Northwell was great to work with in a lot of our clinical trials, but we do need to spread the getting it to the patient model around the country faster.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I think personally, thank you. Having seen how you've helped us master the pandemic was fantastic. And there's more things that need to be solved with respect to government's healthcare. Sue, did you want to have some final words?
Thank you, Petra. Thank you to all of the panelists. And I just want to remind people that there's a ceremony tonight at the American Museum of Natural History where these panel members and their companies will be recipients of the 2021 Roy Vagelos Pro Bono Humanum Award for Global Health Equity. And personally, I think I speak for so many people the relief I felt knowing that antibodies and then vaccines were available for COVID. Think back to where we were before that happened. So what your companies and your colleagues have achieved is breathtaking, and we're all grateful for it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.